The first thing I should say is that there are no magic bullets to productivity. It just takes a lot of discipline and a lot of forcing yourself to do the work, even when you don't want to. But I will try my best. My name is Lydia Foxglove, and I am a fantasy author. I have been both traditionally and self-published, and I have been mostly full-time for the past 16 years. A little bit ago, I made a video called How I Wrote 40 Books in 4 Years that went like semi-viral, and since then a lot of people have asked me for productivity tips or how I was able to do that. In the video I do offer some advice, but I don't really get into productivity specifically. So consider this a follow-up. If you haven't seen that video though, I do also recommend watching that one. First, I've gotten a lot of comments saying something like, that is so amazing, I could never do anything like that, you are so productive, you are so hardworking. So the first thing I want to note is that I started taking writing very seriously when I was 23 years old. I was working part-time and I started treating writing as another part-time job. Like basically I'd work 4 days a week in retail, and then some evenings and 2 of my days off would be devoted to writing. I sold my first book when I was 26, and I've basically been a full-time writer since then. But if you watch the video, I didn't start doing 10 books a year until 2017 when I was 35. So you have quite a gap between when I started taking writing seriously and when I was able to be that productive. Most of those years, I only wrote 1 book a year. So this is not something that just happened overnight. I didn't just sit down like, it'd be so cool to be a writer, and then I was just like, like banging out, 10 books a year. That was not what happened. I have met people like that, but if you're looking for advice as to how to just like go from beginner to like turbo drive in 1 or 2 years, I have no idea, because it took me time to get there. So if you're thinking that you could never write that much, but you would like to, I would say don't count yourself out, because if you have never had the opportunity to become experienced at writing while also not having a full-time job and not having children, you don't really know what you're capable of yet. If I had gone back in time and told myself at 23, at some point you're going to have written 40 books in 4 years, I would have been like, are you sure you time traveled to the correct person? Of course, there are plenty of people who are never able to achieve that pace for any amount of time. You will get to a point where you know your limits, and it's good to accept those limits. Also, you don't necessarily have to ever write that much, even to make a living. I know plenty of people who make a living without writing that much. And I also know some people who write like way more than I ever did, who have like 2 pen names, and both of those pen names are getting like almost a book a month. So there's a wide range, but until you've reached that point where you've really come to understand your limits, you don't really know what they are. I think a lot of people don't take experience in writing as seriously as they should. And maybe part of that is because you have the occasional like hot debut novel that's written by somebody who wasn't really writing very much before. Maybe it's because most people do write in high school and college and so on, and a certain group of any class is going to be pretty good at writing and like writing and maybe think, I have a novel in me. And you might very well be one of those people who was good at writing in school and you've always wanted to be a writer. Maybe you're just starting, maybe you've written 1 or 2 novels. You feel like you're pretty decent at it, and you probably are pretty decent at it, but you don't have years of experience yet, and things change when you get to the point where you do have years of experience. You actually will become much better at certain aspects of a writing career after you put years of work into it. So really, this is not to disparage the talent that a beginner might possess, but simply to assure you that you are actually going to get better and better and better the more that you do it. There's something to be said for that freshness, but there are also things like coming up with a plot or just like confidence that get easier and easier the more that you do it. Okay, so here's the thing about writing a lot of books in a year. Most writers probably average in an hour somewhere between 500 and 2,000 words an hour when you're sitting down to write. For me, the average is about 1,000 words an hour. Sometimes it might only be 500 if I'm struggling with the scene a little bit. Sometimes it might be 2,000 if I'm like completely in the zone. That's pretty rare. Usually it's 1,000 or so. And of course you might be a little slower than that, but even let's say that you write 700 words an hour on average. In 3 hours a day, you will have written 2,100 words a day, and in a month you will have a 60,000 word book. So this just doesn't even sound like very much work compared to an 8-hour day job. 2 hours a day, you're done. You got a book a month. Go relax. And obviously you need a little time for editing as well, but okay, so let's say you add an hour a day to edit your previous book while you're working for 3 hours on the next one. You still got plenty of time to do whatever you want. That's a schedule you can even keep up if you have a full-time job. You get home and you just work for 3 hours and you have a book. But of course, as we know, the real world does not work like this at all. This is purely theoretical. This assumes that your brain is never tired and you never get stuck. And also that you don't have a life. But you know, if you're aiming to be a full-time writer, there's at least a 50-50 chance that you don't really have a life anyway, right? If you're anything like me, you definitely have days where you are very stuck and you absolutely hate everything about writing and you're just sitting at your computer and you're staring at your computer and you're like this, and like maybe eventually you crawl under the table and then maybe eventually you just start to sob. Purely theoretical, of course. If you live near a beautiful river, like I do, sometimes you might have a fantasy of taking your writing device in your hands and taking it down to the river and just giving the whole thing as an offering to the river goddess. So anyway, the part that you're trying to overcome is really the exhaustion and the getting stuck part, not the actual hours that it takes to sit and type away at your book. And of course, this also presumes that you don't have any disabilities or anything that prevents you from writing a certain amount of hours a day or a week, which is actually pretty common because by the time I was like 25 or 26, I was already having like pains in my wrists, pains in my back. By the time I was like 30, I was struggling with dry eye. Writing can be very hard on your body, and even if you don't really have like a disability per se, your body is probably going to protest what you were doing to it if you're just sitting and writing for many hours every day, staring at a computer screen. So here are my best tips for improving your productivity. But again, none of this is advice if it doesn't resonate with you, and there is also like no just magical way to be amazingly productive. There is a lot of hard work involved, and there's no way around that. Number one, like I said, it is really a matter of experience. Do not compare yourselves to the most talented people that you know, either in real life or on the internet or as a fan. When you first begin, you will be very intimidated, and it will be hard to keep up with it if you're comparing yourself to people who are at a higher level. When you begin, the only thing that you are trying to do is get a little better than you yourself were recently. So if you write at X pace, you're just trying to write at a little X plus pace. X plus, I don't know what that concept is, but yeah, try to get just a little better. That's all you need to do right now. Number two, make your creative work the first priority in your life. I mean, after the obvious stuff. You need to feed yourself, and you need to sleep, and you need to see family and friends, and you need to work whatever your day job is if you have one. But after that, before you crash in front of the TV or you mess around on the internet or even read a book or whatever, the stupid little noisy vehicle keeps driving down the street. Anyway, that stuff should always be first. But after you've considered all that, what kind of time do you have left in your week? It should be realistic, but take a moment to assess how much time do I have left over in my week? And then I would set a goal, a reasonable goal for yourself that before you have any like fun, you will get this goal done. And depending on your work schedule, maybe it's just like, I'm gonna write 500 words twice a week. And when those are done, I can go have some fun or stay home and have some fun. That's usually my preference. So you write 500 words 2 days a week, and you have like one shortish book a year. Obviously, that's not a lot. Basically, you're trying to find the spot that you can realistically keep up with your writing. So if you're managing to do that every week, then maybe you try 500 words on the weekends and 2 days when you get off work. And obviously, whatever schedule works for you. There are people that get up early before work and do their writing. There's people that do it after work. There's people who just try to like bust out a bunch of stuff on the weekends. Whatever works for you, just make sure that it is very manageable at first. And if you're regularly achieving this goal and you're not losing your mind, then increase the goal. Keep doing that and you are going to find like where your real limit is. And that limit still might increase, maybe just a little slower. There is no like YouTube video that's going to magically turn you from someone who procrastinates and barely does anything to somebody who's just like busting it out all the time. But consistent practice is really going to help with discipline and improving the amount of words that you're able to write. And if you become a full-time writer, you might find that your limit raises even a little more. Probably not as much as you hope it's going to. Number 3, to assist with point 2, you need to make sure that your technology is not getting in the way of your productivity goal. If you have any tendency to mess around on the internet when you're supposed to be writing, then you need to address that immediately. I have a FreeWrite Traveler, which is a wonderful distraction-free writing device. It has an e-ink display. It connects to the cloud so I can save my work easily, but all you can do on it is write, and you can see about a paragraph at a time, and it's very lightweight, so I can bring it to the coffee shop if I want to. You can't procrastinate in any way. You can't do anything else on this device. Then I also have 2 laptops. One is my old laptop, and the keyboard is like really busted, so it's really hard to write a lot of social media posts on it. You have to really like jam at the keys. They're all kind of falling off. But I use that as my social media device because since it's such a pain in the arse to type with, I can't like get too distracted like writing up like getting in a dumb Facebook argument or something like that. And then I have my newer laptop, which I use for editing my YouTube videos, and I have that connected to my Patreon and my Substack so I can write longer pieces. I don't have the new laptop connected to any of my social media. Not everyone can afford to have a FreeWrite Traveler and 2 laptops and blah blah. I realize that because I would not have been able to afford these things either for most of my career. But it is not super hard to find like an old cruddy laptop that isn't that great at running newer programs or connecting to social media and websites anymore, but it's still fine for just writing with a basic writing program. In fact, if you ask around on FreeCycle or ask your friends and family, you might even just find someone who's like, oh yeah, I got an old laptop, you can just have it. So if you get easily distracted, I would try to find an old laptop or something that you can write on. You might have to get like an external keyboard because the keyboards tend to sometimes die before the computer, and you definitely want to make sure you're backing it up. But that way, when you're writing on that, that will be your writing device, and you can't start browsing because the browser is going to be old and outdated and will barely let you do anything. Obviously, there are also apps you can turn on that will block you for a certain period of time, but I found it was just easier to just like remove the entire thing from the equation. I also use my phone for dictation sometimes, especially like my YouTube scripts and my like email list stuff. That way I can just walk around and those don't need as much editing as a book. That's another good way to get some words down where you're not as likely to get distracted. You also might want to just consider putting your cell phone like somewhat out of reach while you're writing in general. Even with notifications turned off, it can be very easy to just start like Point number 4, you need to work out a process for outlining your books. I know there are people who just write as they go and they still do fast drafts and fast releases. I am definitely not one of those writers. So if you want advice on how to do that, I don't know, go find one of those writers. I really need some kind of outline, and there is no like one way to become good at outlining, so I can't tell you like the surefire way that's going to work for everybody about how to outline your books the most efficiently. But some things that have helped for me are reading books on outlining and having like kind of workbooks or guidelines and using those to do an outline. I really like writing the Breakout Novel Workbook by Donald Moss, and Take Off Your Pants by Libby somebody. I will list those in the comments. You can also use a plot template that already exists or some kind of story that you already like a fair amount of my books were fairy tales, so I already kind of had a template from the fairy tale. Like, it's totally fine to just grab a plot point from something that you enjoyed, or even something you didn't enjoy. Maybe you're just watching like a dumb movie and you're like, that'll work. I mean, whatever ends up working, these ideas can come from strange places at times. And again, there's no one way to get to an efficient outlining process. I can't emphasize enough that practice helped me tremendously with writing better outlines that I was better able to stick to. So don't beat yourself up if it feels a little challenging at first. I always end up going off my outline to some extent. I always have an outline and it always sounds great, and then the characters either behave differently or I actually get to the thing that I planned and it's like, this is not working. So that brings me to my next point, that one thing that I've learned over time is that you really need to avoid getting stuck if you want to write quickly. Like, obviously. How do you avoid getting stuck? Again, experience helps with this, but these are some things that I've learned in my many years of experience where I often get stuck and how I often get out of it. The number one reason that I get stuck is because what I'm writing is boring. And usually if I think about it a little, whatever the boring thing is, I don't need it. It can just be cut. There's always an initial stubbornness where it's like, no, I need the thing, it's in the outline, and like if this doesn't happen, then this part later isn't gonna make sense. But like if you sit down for a minute and just really think about it, there's often a pretty easy way to just remove the boring part completely. Just cut it. Like you don't even have to change it half the time. If you just cut it and say, they had a meeting about the thing, that's it, you're good, you covered it. You don't wanna write it, readers don't wanna read it. But obviously another option is to stop and think, well, what would make this scene fun? Or what would be a really fun thing to put in here, especially if like everything is feeling boring. Sometimes an entire character or an entire like plot element is just kind of boring and you need to stop and think, what would be fun here? I talked about the importance of having fun before, but one thing that has helped me with having fun is just keeping a list of all the things that I find fun in any book, whether I'm reading it or writing it. It could be anything from, it's fun to write about like a creepy old house. It's fun to write scenes where characters are on a date to a bakery. You like this particular kind of drama in your character's past. You probably have all kinds of little things that push your buttons, like circuses or a pet donkey. Like, I don't know, it could be any random thing. But if you have a list of all the little things and big things that you find fun and you get stuck, you can look at the list and go, oh yeah, okay, if I put in this thing, this probably would be more fun. And you might worry that you're going to repeat the things, but in fact, it might just kind of become part of your brand. Chances are, if you like it, readers will like it too. And I've never gotten a review that was like, there are too many bakeries in her books. No one ever complains about fun things being repeated. And that is another hang up, is worrying whether you're being original enough or whether you're repeating yourself. I know early on, I often felt like I had to reinvent the wheel every time that I wrote a book, or I would feel like things were just like too boring and I needed more and different all the time. It's fine if not every book is more or different. In fact, sometimes people just want to read less and the same. Also, chances are, if you were trying to write very fast, if you were watching this and that is your goal, you're probably not trying to write like To Kill a Mockingbird or The Great Gatsby. You're trying to write like a commercial fiction genre. You might want to write a super unique, beautiful literary masterpiece, but this is perhaps not the point in your career when you're going to do that. You're just trying to like get somewhere right now. So you can relax about a lot of these things. And then the final reason is probably the trickiest one, and that is when like the entire story just kind of wants to go a different way, including kind of some of the stuff that you already wrote, and you're feeling a deep resistance to changing the stuff that you already wrote because you're trying to write fast, and the last thing you want to do is go back and edit what you already wrote when you're not even done yet. It just feels like such a setback, and it's so depressing. Every time this happens, I dig in my heels and I'm like, no, I don't want to change it. However, if you're at the point where you're struggling to write every time you sit down and you're getting that nagging little sense that you are going in the wrong direction, let me promise you, I have learned over time the hard way that it's better to just rip off the Band-Aid, take a day, take a deep breath, assess the book, what you've written so far, and make a plan as to what you could change to get the book on track. Many times when you actually sit down and you embrace the fact that you have to make these changes and you make the plan, you'll find out that A, you didn't have to change as many things as you were worried that you'd have to change, and B, the changes that you have to make are so much more fun than what you've been forcing yourself to write. And once you sit down and you have a plan, you're going to feel better about it and you can proceed. And that's my best advice for when you get stuck, but there are so many ways to get stuck, and this is another thing that you just get better at with time, but also you will never entirely fix this problem. You will always get stuck now and then, and you will also always have the sense that you could have done more, you could have been better. That will never go away. Just let it go. And the final thing, make sure that you plan breaks into your schedule, especially as you are amping up your writing schedule and you're getting better at writing faster and you start to feel like you're actually getting into a groove. You might reach a point where you never take a break. I know I just told you to prioritize writing over everything else, but again, this is like kind of intermediate advice. You are now prioritizing writing over everything else all the time, and you're never taking in anything anymore. You may get to a point where you had a goal, like, I'm gonna write 1,000 words today, and then you write the 1,000 words really fast, and you're sitting there like, that was too quick. I could write 2,000 words, and then you just keep going. Or every day it's taking you a long time to write 1,000 words, and you're getting very tired because you're writing until bedtime every day. You're just not taking a break for whatever reason. In fact, hold on a second. Let me just time travel into the past and remind my own self of this advice. Okay, I'm back. I hope that I made life better for my past self. You will know that you need a break because you will be sitting there at your computer and like you know kind of what you want to do and you're not exactly stuck, but you're just kind of sitting there and you're just like, yeah, when you're like that, you need a break. And ideally, that break should not be messing around on the internet either, because that often leads to doom scrolling or looking on social media and comparing yourself to other people and feeling bad about yourself. That's not a break. A break should be just curling up with a good book, or playing a nice cozy video game that relaxes you, or taking a walk, or talking to a friend, or playing with your pets. It should be something that truly replenishes you, body and or soul, or both. I know that like I'm someone who gets very deep into what I'm doing. I have a very like obsessive personality and I get very fixed on what I'm doing. So for me, it has often worked better to just work extremely hard for a chunk of time and then take like days off. And I've learned that I have to build those days off into my schedule or I will not take them. This is another reason I like to watch YouTube videos like with my morning tea or whatever, because there are a lot of YouTube videos that I follow or YouTube creators that will constantly be hammering on the idea of how you need to take a break, and watching them kind of constantly reminds me like, oh, every other artist is dealing with this. I also must take a break. So I think those are about all the productivity tips that I can think of for now. But if you have any productivity tips to share, please drop them in the comments. We can always use more tips. I hope this helps, but also please do remember to go easy on yourself. I wrote 40 books in 4 years, but I'm not sure that was really the best thing. So even though people keep asking me how to do it, in some ways I'm kind of like, don't. But sometimes you need to. Sometimes you need money, and it still seems like the best option out of the options that you have. And if you're in that position, I hope that some of this has helped you. I'm rooting for you. I want to remind you that this does not all happen in a day. I wish you all the best in all of your creative endeavors. And if you're interested in joining my little burgeoning community of writers and creators, you can join my Patreon and connect to my Discord, where we have been having a lot of great conversations about writing advice and cheering each other on with our projects. I also have a free weekly Q&A, which you can access by joining either my Patreon or Substack for free. Thank you so much for spending time with me today, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye! If you live near a beautiful river,